y'all, so we asked our wonderful, talented, crafty mother to make some real satin bonnets for y'all, and she actually agreed. She was so excited to do it that she wanted to do 4. Well, she actually wanted to do 5, but we stuck with 4 for time's sake, and they came out really good. Most of them were thought up overnight and some as we went, and she did an amazing job. Here are some of the tools that you'll need, but I will list them down in more detail in the description box below. For the first bonnet, you don't need a sewing machine for this. We're going to actually hand sew it. First, you're just going to fold the material into a rectangle twice, and then you want to measure out how large you want the diameter of your circle to be. My mom is measuring out hers at 12.5 inches and is making dashed lines as she goes or as she measures. Then connect the dots to create a line to help guide the cut of the fabric. Before cutting, pin the material for stability, and then you will be ready to cut. Since she's making a contrasting reversible satin cap, she's tracing her gray fabric onto the black fabric with the chalk pencil to avoid having to remeasure. The chalk pencil will disappear. It is not permanent. Also, your pinning doesn't have to be precise. Match the satin sides together. Since the circles are uneven, she trimmed the black fabric to get a more even cut. Next, you want to clip the edges of the circle to help ease the seam. You'll need hem or seam tape to bind the seam together with an iron. Be careful when ironing, you don't want to burn yourself, and the steaming part is optional. My mom did it for preference. Also, make sure you leave an opening in the circle large enough that your hand can fit through. Then afterwards, peel the backing off of the tape. Put both satin sides facing each other and then iron the seams together. At the opening, reach in and turn the circle inside out. Now adjust the edges by pulling them out. Pin around the edges to stabilize the circle. No precise pinning is needed. At 2.5 inches, she's marking the circle to the first stitch line for the elastic casing. Then connect the lines around the circle. She used 2 inches to create the second elastic casing line, and you also want to make sure you leave hand space so that you can pull the elastic through. Double thread your needle and make sure to use enough thread to hand sew the first circle line. Begin sewing your first line as you see my mom is doing. The hand sewing doesn't have to be perfect. Make sure as you're sewing, you're smoothing out the material so that it doesn't bunch up. When you're done, double knot the end of your stitch and cut the extra threading off. For the second line, all you do is repeat the same technique as you did when you sewed the first line. You should be able to see stitching on both sides. You can use a damp cloth to erase the Invisa ink. Use elastic to measure the diameter of your head. You'll need 2 safety pins to pin both ends of the elastic. Pin one end of the elastic to one side of the opening of the bonnet. Then unpin the opening of the bonnet to pull the elastic through the casing as you see my mom is doing. The material on the bonnet will naturally begin to gather. When you're done pulling the elastic through the casing, hand sew the elastic ends together. Be sure to double thread your needle. After threading the elastic together, You want to seal the opening of the bonnet by ironing the seam closed. After that, voila, you're finished. Follow steps used to cut circles for the first bonnet and pin satin sides together. Then you want to clip ends to ease the stitch as we did before. Then sew your seam. The seam width is to your liking. My mom is using about a half inch seam width. Also be sure to leave an opening to pull the right side out. Also, don't forget to adjust the seam by pulling the edges of the circle. 2.5 inches from the seam, she's making her first line. Also, be sure to pin down the opening, and you just want to connect the dots and make a line. And the second line is going to be 2 inches away from the seam. And you also want to leave an opening in that second line to pull the elastic through. Using a sewing machine, sew both elastic casing lines. Be sure not to sew the second line closed. Another way to measure the elastic is to take a tape measure and measure your head, and then cut the elastic to the length of the measuring tape. Then pull elastic through the casing using the same method in bonnet number 1. After you're through pulling the elastic through the casing, sew the elastic ends together. Then pin the opening closed by turning the hem inward and then sew it together. Then you're finished. This can be worn reversible, but you can also add decorative embellishments to your bonnet. My mom decided to hot glue flower embellishments to this satin cap to give it some personality. Fold the material once, but you want to use the same methods used in bonnet number 1 to measure, mark, and cut out the circle. My mom measured the diameter of the circle bigger for this bonnet at 18 inches for when she roller sets her hair at night, or big enough for her to wear her braids or any other hairstyle that may need more space. Using a serger, she is finishing her edges for a neater appearance. Then you want to fold the circle in half to save time for this step. To determine placement of the buttonholes, she's measuring 4 inches apart around the circle. Allow the Invisa ink to bleed through the other side of the circle. At each 4-inch marking, my mom is marking 3 inches from the hem line to determine how far she wants her buttonholes to be. Using a buttonhole attachment, sew a buttonhole at each 3-inch marking. My mom's buttonholes are 2 inches wide. After sewing the buttonholes, use a seam ripper to open the buttonholes. Take your ribbon of choice and thread it through the holes. My mom is using a 2-inch ribbon. This process is easier when you attach a safety pin to the end of the ribbon. Clip the ends of the ribbon long enough to tie, but you might need to clip them again after trying on the bonnet to your liking. As said before, use the same method in bonnet number 1 to measure, mark, and cut out your circle. The measurements for this bonnet is at 13 inches. Then you want to finish your edges with the serger for a neater look. At about ½ inch, she's sewing a gathering line. Most people use 2 gathering lines, but for this project, she's using only 1. To gather, both threads need to be on top. Gather the thread to where the bonnet is small enough to fit your head. Once you're done gathering, tie off ends to prevent the gather from slipping. then cut off the excess string. Similar to the one shown, take a smooth stretchy headband and place it over the right side of the bonnet. This part may be a little tricky when sewing, but it can be done. As she's sewing, she's stretching the headband but not the bonnet. Don't rush this part, take your time because you'll need to adjust the gather and the headband as you sew. And you're finished! But my mom hot glued some lace for a more decorative look. When gluing the lace, glue the lace to the bonnet and not the headband. Ensure that the gathers are not bunched when gluing. This prevents restriction on the headband whenever you put it on. And of course, cut off any excess lace. And you're finished! I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. And I hope you guys try out the bonnets, whether you do it hand sewn or machine sewn. Let us know if you try it out. Tag us on Instagram or post it on our Facebook page. Love you guys. See you next video.